The Beat with Jason Johnson in for Ari starts right now. Hi, Jason.
Hi, thanks, Nicole. Welcome to The Beat. I'm Jason Johnson in for Ari Melber. D.C. is on high alert, just hours away from another right-wing rally at the Capitol. The rally is in support of the January 6th insurrectionists. Former President Trump expressing sympathy for them. Authorities say they are ready, and here's why they're taking precautions. One of the jailed MAGA riot defendants recently said this.
Now, if the president said, if the, well, soon to be president, Mr. Trump said, hey, go to the Capitol again, there might be a large movement going that way. But I don't see that happen.
Lanny, you think he's coming back? He says soon to be president?
Absolutely. People from all sides recognize that man's ability to negotiate.
How is that possibly going to happen?
Well, if he was able to speak on a public platform again, then it would absolutely happen.
I don't know if they believe in Trump or the Great Pumpkin. That rioter seems to believe that Trump is coming back to power, and he's going to appear just magically hours after the rally. Trump is asking Georgia Secretary of State to decertify the 2020 election, the same big lie that fueled the January 6th riot, and Capitol Police speaking today about their preparations for what could happen this weekend.
There have been some threats of violence associated with the events for tomorrow, and we have a strong plan in place to ensure that it remains peaceful and that if violence does occur, that we can stop it as quickly as possible. We're not going to tolerate violence, and we will not tolerate criminal behavior of any kind.
National Guard is standing by, and that fence around the Capitol is back up. Look, since the insurrection, we haven't seen that much change. Democracy is still under attack. The Republican Party is still beholden to a blogger and twice impeached person in Florida, refusing to speak out against Trump, who says his heart is with the protesters this weekend. In Pennsylvania, Republicans are pushing an election audit. Today, we learned a pro-impeachment Republican lawmaker is leaving Congress, citing the toxic dynamics within his own party. To discuss all this, joining me now is David Corn, the Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones, Ryan Riley, the senior justice reporter for Huffington Post, and Rutgers professor Brittany Cooper. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight on The Beat. David, I'll start with you. There's a large number of Republican lawmakers, many of whom have publicly backed the insurrectionists, voted against impeachment, but they're not showing up to this event that could be happening tomorrow. What has changed? I mean, these guys were saying it with their chests just a couple weeks ago. What's changed about so many Republican officials not wanting to show up at this rally tomorrow?
Well, that's a really good question. The Trump cult of personality is a bit of a weird cult. There are different levels of belief. There are, the people like you just played out there who believes he's going to reappear like the Great Pumpkin and be president again. And then there are members of Congress who believe that or are close to that and or act as if they believe the election was stolen. But I think a lot of them don't believe it at all. They're just running scared. They're running scared of their own base that has been radicalized and weaponized by Trump and other conservative groups within the Republican Party universe. And so it's chasing people like Anthony Gonzalez out of the party. You had a congressman named Scott Perry from Pennsylvania who's out there today saying that the January 6th protesters are being held like they're at Guantanamo and haven't been released. Almost all of them have been released. They're being prosecuted. He called them peaceful protesters. We've seen the video. So there's a lot of denial and big lying going on again and again and again. But when it comes down to it, there are only a handful of Republican Congress people at the January 6th riot itself, at the march beforehand. A lot of these Republicans are just more scared than they are fierce warriors for Trump, right? But they're still enabling him and enabling that army. He put together an army of extremists, Christian nationalists, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, to try to stop the election on January 6th. And these Republicans, whether they want to be there with pitchforks or not, are still enabling those forces, those authoritarian anti-democratic forces, some of whom, a small percentage of them, are coming back to town tomorrow.
It's interesting. Trump brings together this whole motley group of deplorables. It's like that gang they had in Blazing Saddles where they were trying to put like the worst gang together in the country. And the interesting thing about it is that as much as many Republicans are trying to get those people to come out and vote for them, they also don't seem to want to stand for them in public. Ryan, we have a quote here from General Honore talking about the fact that he thinks that we sometimes have a soft glove approach on domestic terrorism. I am one of the people, and many, Americans out there have said, why isn't the boom being lowered on insurrections the same way it was on, say, Black Lives Matter protesters last year? You still got people who are being given special dispensation here and there. What is sort of the sense about why we haven't seen as many of the insurrectionists facing serious legal charges the way we've seen for other people who are perhaps protesting for good?
Yeah, the case that I always bring up in connection with this is if you look at what happened during Trump's inauguration, when hundreds of anti-Trump protesters were rounded up on the street and had serious felonies slapped at them for being on the street and not committing any violence. You stack that up against how the January 6th defendants have been handled. And I mean, it just sort of looks ridiculous, the entire argument that is being made for this rally. If you look at how many people are actually detained and what they're detained for, there's not really a good, person that they could seize on and say, oh, hey, look how this person is being mistreated. There's not really a case that would demonstrate that or illustrate that or a poster boy for that you could say, okay, this person, is nonviolent or wasn't involved in a conspiracy and has been jailed for however long, because there aren't that many cases. The vast majority of people have been released pre-trial. There are a few dozen who are detained, and basically all of those people are either part of a broader conspiracy where they pre-planned an attack on democracy, or they were on video committing violence. The judges have been relatively generous about, I think, releasing people pre-trial, given some of the charges they are facing. And there's some who have had some regrets about that. And some of them immediately when they were released violated their conditions and then had to be sent back to jail. There is the one individual in the QAnon shirt who was chasing, that famous video of him chasing Officer Eugene Goodman up the stairs. And he actually was released. And then he couldn't stay away from this conspiracy material and then was actually sent out to jail because of that. Because the first time the probation officer showed up to his house, he was streaming Mike Lindell's, conspiracy theories online. So it's this addiction. It truly is. It's this, I think because their lives would sort of fall apart if they admitted the truth here, which is that, I got completely suckered by this bogus conspiracy theory and I basically ruined my life because of it, because I fell for a con man. That's what they would have to admit. And that's not a situation that most of them are in. They actually subscribe to these beliefs. And if you actually subscribe to these beliefs, you think, you have to stick with them and you have to think that President Trump is going to be reinstalled.
Professor Cooper, I can think back to being in Ferguson. And literally having police announce it was the most dangerous game of Simon Says ever. They would say, hey, you got to protest in the streets. You got to stand here. You got to stand there. And no matter where you went, no matter how many twister positions you put yourself into, they were still locking people up, throwing them away, people who weren't seen for a while or anything else like that. We saw all sorts of hyper-aggressive policing when it comes to people who are fighting for justice. But again, we see so many people here who engage in a terrorist activity walking away. Obviously, that's racial. But the larger question that I have for you today is, what are the consequences of that? I mean, isn't that sort of soft hand that General Honore is talking about inspiring other people to engage in this activity at the local level?
The United States has always been complicit in white supremacist actions like this, because the truth that we need to tell is that this violence has been critical to shoring up white dominance in the country. The Republican Party knows it. And at this point, part of what Trump did for them is to unleash their ability to actually publicly assent to violence. So they won't get behind these people, but they also won't denounce them, because they know that violence becomes really important to their ability to enforce their own sort of brazen power grab for generational white dominance, right? When I look at these folks, I just think that they're playing from a post-Civil War playbook where they're basically remixing lost cause ideology and saying, this wasn't about how we want to be white supremacists. This is about the fact that this was stolen from us. Our values are not being respected. This is an old narrative, but it is finding truck in this moment. And if what Biden said is true, he admitted when he came into office that domestic terrorism was perhaps the biggest threat on our soil, then we need the U.S. government to act in that way. And that means to take seriously what is actually happening. But the psychological problem that many white folks struggle with, not all white folks, but many white folks, is that they still understand this as just a mere ideological difference and not an actual attempt at terrorism, right? They understand that these folks are saying, we just have a different political position than you, which is interesting because because when Black people protest, it's not seen as a difference of principle or a desire to expand democracy. Every Black protest is seen as a potential insurrection, right? And actual white insurrections are seen as mere protest in service and in protection of one's rights. And that is the problem that we have.
Right. I mean, we're a week away from the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. The transformation that this country went through after facing foreign terror, is immensely more aggressive than anything we've seen in the 6 to 8 months after someone literally tried to take over the government. Speaking of the government, some people don't want to take it over. Some people want to get out of it. David, I want to play you some audio from a congressional representative in Ohio who's basically saying, I'm taking my ball and going home because this party's become too toxic. I'll get your thoughts on the other side.
The truth is the environment is very toxic, and especially, the dynamics inside our own party, which have sort of stopped making sense to me in a lot of ways. We just seem to have lost the ability to dialogue and to reason and to do it in a way that's respectful and thoughtful inside of politics. Our politics has gotten so polluted that environment, for me personally, is just not one that I'm willing to be a part of going forward.
Now, David, on the playground, we would refer to this usually as taking your ball and going home. Look, is this an act of courage or is this quitting? Because I can see it both ways.
Yeah, this guy, Anthony Gonzalez, I don't know him personally, but I know that he was an NFL player. So I'm guessing there's a certain amount of toughness in him, right? And if he can't take this, that just shows you how bad it is. That there was this moment, you remember, we've talked about this, Jason, right after the January 6th riot, maybe it lasted 1 or 2 nanoseconds when Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy, and Lindsey Graham all kind of said, we've had enough. This is going too far, whether it's white supremacy, attacking the government, and to Professor Cooper's point, when the Black Lives Matter people protest, they're protesting against systemic racism. This was an attempt to take over a part of the government and stop a constitutional process. Nothing similar at all between these two things, even if you have different ideologies. But so here we are. We had that moment where Republicans said, okay, and I felt like they said, we can get rid of Trump now. This is it. He finally went too far. And that lasted, as I said, a nanosecond or two. And then quickly, McConnell and Kevin McCarthy all came into line. McCarthy went down to Mar-a-Lago to get Trump to fundraise. And they saw the party is the base. The 80% of the party who believes Trump is still the president or should be president. They have radicalized their own base that now they can't have those reasonable debates within the party that Representative Gonzalez wants to happen. So this is a sort of a snake eating its own tail type of situation. And I don't see any room for a Gonzalez or a Liz Cheney or anybody else. They're not making progress anymore. They need to leave and diminish this party as much as possible if they care about democratic values.
I got to say, I'm a bit more of a stay and fight kind of person, but I can understand any sort of toxic work environment. Maybe they want to quit. David Corn, Ryan Riley, and Brittany Cooper, thank you so much for starting us off today.